Make no mistake, being an entrepreneur is tough. You're trying to build a business, manage a team, deliver your product or service, and of course, make more money, all while trying to eat healthy and get to the gym, raise your kids, and maybe even make it to date night more than twice a year. So, when hustling harder doesn't work for you, how do you find the time, energy, and skills to build the business you want while being the parent and partner your family deserves? My name is Nick Murphy, and this is the Parentpreneur Podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. I'm extremely excited to introduce you to our next guest, Colin Boyd. Colin is obsessed with helping experts and entrepreneurs sell from stage in a non-pushy and sleazy way. Amen. He keynotes at conferences around the world on topics such as persuasive communication and selling ideas. He's a certified speaking professional with clients including Coca, Suncorp, Fuji, Xero, and Hewlett, Packard, to name just a couple. He runs high-level mastermind programs for speakers and content creators and delivers his signature program, Sell from Stage Academy, which helps people turn every presentation into a money-making machine. He lives in beautiful Newport Beach, California, where it's nice and warm, I'm sure, right now, with his wife and two little kids. Colin, man, I'm thrilled to have you. How are you?
I'm amazing. Thanks for having me, Nick. It's actually one of the one days of the year, you're going to feel sorry for me, where it's raining. And so it rains about 2 or 3 days a year in Newport Beach, and it's today. But it's a good day.
Clouds. How are you going to survive, man? You got clouds.
Totally. Like, everyone freaks out. Like, no one knows how to drive. No one knows how to move around the area. No one knows how to handle rain here.
Yeah, I'm from Arizona. It's very similar. There's a little bit of a puddle and people are swerving out of the way like it's an ice storm or something. It's crazy.
It's so true. Love it.
Before we get started, I think it's important to just understand kind of your origin story. How did you get started in speaking, and when did you decide that was your passion and really lean into that as your vocation?
Yeah, well, I started out as a life coach. And so I was studying a diploma of life coaching, and to be really honest, I was struggling to get clients. And I remember I was trying different techniques. I remember I was trying to do some things on Facebook. And I even went out one day, and this was when I was living in Australia. You can probably hear I've got an Australian accent. And I went around to the telegraph poles where they had all the light poles and things like that. And I remember getting a letter and writing, need help with your life, and having, little pull things off. And I had my name and my phone number. And this was the level, this was the sophistication of my marketing, Nick. So you can see at what level I was playing at. And I remember going out there after a couple of hours and walking to the crossing and seeing they were all gone. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to get a flood of leads. And then I looked down and I could see that they were flying all over the intersection. Someone had just destroyed my whole marketing campaign. And so I was... You going to say something?
Well, this is the best CTA ever. Need help with your life? Click here. Or just, really.
Totally. It was
amazing.
It was so specific. Hit on all their pain points. So I was just really struggling. I think I had one client, and I was just really struggling to get clients. And then what happened was I had a complimentary speaking engagement. And I remember heading into the night. It literally was a dark and stormy night. The event organizer came up to me and said, Colin, you wouldn't believe it. This is the biggest event we've ever had. And for me, that was bad news, because I was thinking I'm just going to look like an idiot in front of more people. And I went in and he said, we've got 137 people in the room. So I went in that night and I delivered my presentation. At the end, I made and I didn't know this at the time, an irresistible offer. And I presented my content, made the offer. And out of 137 people, we had 125 of them give me their personal details to be in contact with me about my services. From there, I ended up signing 10 coaching clients. And then 2 days later, a finance executive from Hewlett Packard called me for their major conference to book me for my first paid speaking gig. And I remember it was in that moment when I had that epiphany, that revelation of a stage, and we can talk about what a stage is, but a stage is the fastest way to grow and scale your business. And that just happened overnight for me in that sense.
That's amazing. We'll get into what a stage is here in a minute. But before we do that, why is story as a thing so important for personal brand entrepreneurs when it comes to connecting with and creating and growing an audience?
Story is crucial because of these reasons. The first reason is that when you tell your story, no one's listening to your story. Now, the reason why that's important is because when you share your story, the audience is actually listening to their own story. And so as they're sharing their story, even for me, when I just shared my story then about my experience with speaking on stage, maybe you're in a position where maybe you're struggling with clients, or maybe you've tried some marketing and you were thinking in your mind, maybe I haven't tried that, but I've tried a few things and it's just not working and I'm really struggling, right? And so when I'm telling my story actually has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, the listener. And so that's one of the first reasons why story is so powerful. The second reason is because when we tell our story, a human's unconscious or subconscious mind comes forward. And so all of the yeah buts, the resistance points, the things that would stop someone saying yes to you, to your offer or your program or working with you, they actually go away and their unconscious mind comes forward and they become, open. The story starts to go into their heart. And the third thing is that it transfers an epiphany. And this is one of my obsessions when we talk about with the selling from stage, speaking on stage, is that when you tell a story, the goal of the story is not to tell a story. The goal of the story is to transfer an epiphany to the audience. And it's the epiphany that they must believe for them to say a congruent yes to your program or your offer. And so for me, they're kind of the three things, is that your unconscious mind comes forward, your story helps people have an epiphany, and it really just transfers that emotion to them.
That's awesome. We'll dig into a lot of this stuff here later in the conversation, but your mastery really lies in how to speak from stage in a way that creates connection first and then builds an audience, but ultimately leads you to be able to sell more offers. So before we go any further, I think it is really important to go back to that question. How do you define a stage? Because there's a lot of people in the audience who aren't public speakers, who don't want to be public speakers, who the idea of going out onto a stage in the traditional sense is just something that they could easily glaze over. I know that's not exactly what you mean by stages, but how do you define a stage today?
Yeah, for me, there's three stages. There's three types of stages. The first stage is the classic live stage. And to me, that is the Mecca. The live stage is the Mecca. It's the summit. And the reason why I say that is because in terms of my expertise and what I teach, is I help people to speak in a way that sells. And not sells pushy wise, but just sells them into the new program. Now, when you're doing a live presentation, and we've done this with some of the top influencers literally in the world. I do this with our programs. I've helped so many people do this, and they come back to me and they present at a live workshop, or they do a keynote, and then they make an offer at the end, and they literally convert like between 15 up to 50% of the audience into their program. And so they come back to me and they're like, Colin, this just blew my mind. I had no idea that a live stage was so powerful. That's the first one, the live stage. The second stage that I find is most powerful is usually like a webinar. So a webinar stage is like exceptional for me. And then the third one is just a straight up like a video stage. And so they're the three that I really focus on. Yeah, you could go into like a podcast as a stage and so forth, because essentially a stage is any platform where you have leveraged communication with an audience. So it's any platform where you have leveraged communication with the audience. But for me, what I obsess about is live stage, webinar stage, and then video stage. They're the three things that I think are most helpful.
So all three of those stages have something in common, and it's visual. So you kind of knocked podcasts off of a stage. I've heard other people, competitors of yours, people in the space talk about podcasts or a stage, all different types of stage definitions. What is it about the visual component in terms of your belief and your perspective that makes those three stages you listed so much more compelling or more valuable, or however you want to kind of term that?
Well, I think if you study, so I'm a practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, which is essentially the study of how we communicate and enable people to create behavior change. Yep. And if you look at that, how people change behavior and how they understand and take learnings in their life is through all their senses. It's through visual, auditory, kinesthetic mainly. So what they see, what they hear, what they feel. And so the more senses you can engage, i.e. visual and auditory, which leads to kinesthetic, the faster the rapport, that trust factor can happen. And that's why in a 1 hour presentation, if you have a high level program or even a 1 day presentation, if you have a high level program that you're delivering live, and then you mention it or you share people to go to the next steps in your high level program, people will literally, sign up to programs that are worth, what they would pay for a house sometimes because of the level of trust that you can build in a live experience. So that's my obsession around visual. Yeah.
So you've worked with a ton of people. You've worked with Amy Porterfield. You've worked with James Wedmore. These people that we look at as top marketers. So this isn't just like the basic level kind of stuff. Anybody can benefit from it. But what is it that you taught those, what we would consider, those people have made it already. They're already in kind of the elite club, if you will, of digital marketing people out there. They were kind of like the OGs. They've been around a hot minute and they've got all the audience already. So of course they can have $4, $5, $6 million launches. What was it that you taught them that enabled them to go out and create a faster connection or make more sales? Kind of looking for that. What was it that they were lacking or could improve upon that you taught them directly?
Well, I mean, whether it's with Amy or with James or Stacey Tushel, Britt Seaver, like all these other people that I work with, a lot of the time it comes down to the fundamentals. And what I mean by the fundamentals is that when you have an audience, there are two things that you must do. Two things. And I've been really just contemplating on what is it that makes someone say yes to your program, right? And this is all on the basis that your program delivers with integrity what it says it's going to deliver, right? So the basis is this, is you have to create a desire, as my American friends would say, a desire for what you are sharing, the offer, and reduce resistance that they have towards it. And so it's usually one of those two things. And I've been obsessing about these two ideas for a long time. And so really all I did was looked at their content and just rearranged it so that it made sure that it hit the desire points and it hit the resistance points and reversed them. And so one of the biggest things that I think people get wrong is that they don't address the resistance points enough. And so what I mean by that is if people aren't buying your offer, it's usually more often the fact that you haven't reframed their resistance points as opposed to creating desire for what you have.
Super, super interesting. So many places I could go with that. But before, I've got a million follow-up questions already at the top of my head. But before we get into that, let's walk through your framework. Like, what are the things that, if I were going on stage tomorrow, call it a webinar. There's a lot of folks in the audience that have a webinar coming up or they've run them before. How would they think about sequencing their story in a way based on your framework that would do that would shuffle the order of things to create that connection and that authority that brings more people into your world?
That's great. Well, essentially in every presentation, there's three main things you're going to be kind of moving through. There's the introduction, the content, and the close, right? Introduction, content, and close. Now, for me, in those three things, there are actually four things that you've got to move through. And this is what we teach in Sell from Stage Academy. It's essentially the first one is you need to touch hearts. And so touching hearts is about showing to the audience that you get them, that you are relevant, that what you're about to share with them will have immense importance and impact on their life. And so specifically the type of story you would share there, which creates not just desire for what you have, but also credibility and relevance, is usually your signature story. Now, your signature story is like, it's usually your origin story, but specifically, it is a story that reinforces the epiphany of the vehicle that you're offering. And so, for example, for me, the vehicle I offer is a stage. And so I have to share a story of a time when I had an epiphany or a revelation for whatever. Let's say you're selling Facebook groups, or you're helping people with relationships or boundaries in their relationships. You have to share a story that shows the audience a time when you had that revelation that Facebook groups, boundaries in audience, in relationships, whatever it is, the vehicle that you sell, that you used that vehicle to get the results that the audience wants. And so at the start, it's about touching hearts. The second part, which is we move into the content, is about shifting minds. And so depending on what type of presentation you're doing, if you're speaking to sell, so for example, you're on a webinar, you're making an offer at the end. If I'm at a presentation, I'm making an offer at the end, I'm really going to be touching on, like we talked about, the resistance points and the desire points. And so I'm going to be sharing ideas and concepts that these are the beliefs that the audience must have about my vehicle or the offer so that they can say yes. So for example, I use the example that's obviously familiar with me. One of the beliefs the audience must have to be able to kind of do what I do is to understand that speaking is selling. as opposed to speaking is education, speaking is entertainment, speaking is connection. Now it's all those things, but until they realize that speaking is actually selling, whether you're selling an idea or a concept, they're not going to say yes to my offer. And so what your audience has to do is think about what is the belief or what is the idea that your audience must get on board with, so that when it comes to your offer, there's a congruent yes for them. And so that's the second part, shifting their minds. The third part is equipping their hands. So depending on if you're selling at the end, you're probably not going to be too much equipping of hands. You'll do a little bit. That's activities and practicals. And the final piece is moving their feet. And moving their feet is the close, depending on what you do, whether you're doing what I call a sharp sell. A sharp sell is like you're directing them to an offer. A soft sell, which is like an upgrade to a content piece or an opt-in, or a no sell, which is just a classic keynote where you finish off and everyone's inspired and they give you hands and a standing ovation.
Awesome. So I'm just thinking about the different kinds of sales, and you just touched on it. But from a time standpoint, I can see a 60-minute keynote presentation on a live stage having a lot more time to share with the origin story. Maybe it's a short offer, maybe it's not. But in the context of a webinar, the origin story is condensed into a couple minutes. You get the usual things like, hey, where you're from, type this in the comments, you get some engagement. You show that it's live, you do your deal, and then you start your intro. Does time play any element at all? When you talk about your origin story and touching hearts, how long should that take as a percentage of our overall story, if you will, and on whatever specific stage you're on?
So usually, for me, a webinar or a live keynote, it's similar timing. It might be a little bit shorter in a webinar. Webinar is usually the introduction, the touching hearts bit with the signature story in total is probably about like 10 to 12 minutes, I would say, at the introduction, where you're creating desire and relevancy for your topic and you're sharing your signature story. So signature story is probably between 3 to 6 minutes.
Okay. I've listened to webinars. I've gotten onto podcasts where, there's chit chat at the beginning, or there's like, okay, get to the point. Is the signature story, is the way that you've structured everything purposefully to connect with the actual ideal person, the person that's going to buy? And are you okay with people in that 10 or 12 minutes checking out or saying, get to the point, or I don't care? Is there any concern for that? Or are you really just speaking to the people and creating that connection with whomever's the right candidate for you to pull them through the sequence of events that they will land at the offer and go, I'm a hell yes?
Well, I know for me, like if the whole thing of like, I don't really care, or can you hurry up and so forth, that only happens when the way you're telling the story is not entertaining. Because if you tell a good story, people will just engage with it. If it's easily between 3 to 5 minutes, they will easily engage with it. Now, the biggest thing with adults is that, first of all, they hate being told that you're going to tell a story. So if you say, let me tell you a story, or let me tell you my story, people are going to go, oh gosh, like I'm never going to get this 5 minutes of my life back, right? You literally just go straight into your story. It was December 2018, whatever date it was, and you tell about the moment that really changed your life. You go straight into it. People rarely will go, oh, great. And then you use all the senses, like the visual, the auditory, kinesthetic. Like, what were you seeing? It was a dark and stormy night. I was walking up with my wife. I was feeling really nervous. I had a conversation with the event organizer. Like, you go into the details and people will just engage with it. Their unconscious mind comes forward, and then they're ready to go on the journey with you. And so I wouldn't normally be that worried about it with that. And so the other thing I wanted to share with that is, first of all, never tell them that you're telling a story. Secondly, tell them why you told the story. And so, because if you just share a story and just finish, it has nothing to do with what you're talking about, then people will go, what was that story about? So you have to bring back the relevance. Like, I'm about to do a presentation for, it's the Californian Human Resource Institute. And so they've asked me to speak on persuasive communication. To be honest, now I don't speak much to corporate audiences. I mainly work with entrepreneurs, but occasionally I do some of these speeches. And I'm going to share a story about, so when I arrived in America, we'd just moved over. We got a family, 2 little kids, my wife. We've moved into our house in Irvine. I'm freaking exhausted, right? I'm just absolutely exhausted. And I'm going up to Whole Foods. We go up to Whole Foods and I'm walking down the aisles, and I go to the deli, so where you buy the meats. Is that what you guys call it here, the deli?
Yeah, it's still a deli.
It's still a deli. That's right.
It's basically the deli. It's like, it's kind of like Canada and the U.S., Australia. You know, we're all like one big happy.
One big happy. And I go to the guy, hey buddy, do you have any beer? And he kind of looks at me like this.
And I have no idea what that is.
And I said, I thought he obviously didn't hear me. So I said, do you have any beer? And the guy like looks at me and he says it back to me. He says, beer? And I remember hearing it going, you're right. What on earth is that word? And then I said, beer. And he was like, all right, beer. Yeah, that's in the second aisle, just straight on the left. And so the reason why I'm sharing that story is because if you don't communicate in a way that people understand, you're never going to get them to take action. Now, I'm going to share that story with a bunch of HR directors, right, about getting beer. But if I just shared that story and didn't say the reason why I'm sharing it, people would go, it's kind of a funny story, but what's the point? But if I say, when you're communicating, you have to communicate so that people understand, not so that they just hear you. And we're going to have a conversation about how to communicate in a way that people understand and take action. They don't just hear you in meetings anymore. And so can you see how all of a sudden a beer story becomes a funny and relevant story that they just go, wow, that's cool. I like it.
And then from there, you'd pivot into your content, whatever the core of the message is that you want to deliver. I think a lot of people out there, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with asking for the sale. They struggle with the offer. What can you tell us about the offer process and how to transition? Because I know there's a lot of people in the audience that might be good storytellers. They can do the first 2/3 really, really well. And then they get to the offer and they're like, yeah, I got this like thing. And if maybe you want it, you could like meet my team in the back, or you could like text this word to like 4422.
It's so true. It's so true. So there's a few things with your offer. I think you have to realize that the energy does change slightly in the conversation, and you have to expect that. So if you don't expect the energy to change at all, you're going to feel surprised. And so if you haven't made an offer before, first of all, I would recommend to practice it. Like, that is the piece that you must linguistically have so down in your language, so that when you get there, it feels comfortable. It's like rote learn. It's just rolling off the tongue, right? Because your brain is going to be freaking out when you get to that point. I would recommend to practice it. Understand that the energy is going to slightly shift there. I know for me, you have to understand why you're making the offer. And so, because if I feel like I'm making an offer to just get something from someone, it feels incongruent. It feels a bit off. And the audience can feel that. But for me, one of the things that I teach people is that when they come to the offer bit, the offer is actually, it's somewhat sacred in a way. And what I mean by that is, when you make an offer, for me, an offer is a space that people can enter if they choose to, and if it's relevant for them, that could potentially see transformation and change in their life. And so for me, when I make an offer, I say, hey, I've got this space that I've created for you. And if you've resonated with the content and the ideas, then I would love to invite you to whatever it is, the program that you're mentioning. And so for me, it's not about getting them to push them to do something. It's saying, hey, it's an offer. It's like, would you like to move forward in this way? And so I've got a space that you can enter where you can see transformation. If you resonate with the content, then this is for you. If you didn't, it's totally fine. It's not for you. And so just having that congruency in your heart of knowing that you're simply you're making an offer as opposed to a sell. It's an offer to enter a space.
Is there anything different whether you're offering an opt-in, hey, that's a very innocent lead magnet, like, hey, if you want to get this checklist, just do this, versus if you want my $10,000 mastermind, fill out an application. Is there any difference at all in the way that you present that, or the way you lead up to it, or the way you articulate it linguistically, based on whether it's a paid offer or just an offer for a transfer of information?
100%. So depending on what offer you're making, like the bigger the offer, usually the slower you're going to go through it and the more time you're going to spend on it. So if you've got an opt-in or a content upgrade, you can get that done in under a minute. if you're moving someone to join a $1997 program, you're going to spend on an hour presentation, you're probably going to spend 10 to 15 minutes going through that actual offer itself. Now, if you're selling like a mastermind program, like a $20,000 mastermind program, you're probably going to, spend even a bit longer going through it, and you're going to go through it slower and explaining it and seeing if it resonates with people. And so usually the bigger the offer, the slower you're going through it and the more time you're going to take with it. And so with like a content upgrade, I mean, you can just throw that in throughout your presentation. Like point 3, hey, we've got a worksheet on that. You can grab it right here. I'll refer to it at the end if you missed this, but make sure you write it down or grab it right now. And then you can just move on.
I think some of the resistance from people in the audience that are watching might be, I've tried this and it didn't work, or it flopped, or it feels incongruent with the offer. It's not necessarily your area of expertise, but I know your business and I know your kind of crew well enough to know that like you understand what an irresistible offer is. Can you, in your own words, kind of articulate what makes an offer irresistible to an audience and why that should just be a seamless kind of part of your presentation rather than this like, here's my content and now here's the offer? Because I think a lot of people in their mind draw this hard line. In a really well-crafted, truly irresistible offer, it flows and it's congruent and it makes sense and it's just part of the conversation.
This is a big thing, because one of the big mistakes that people make is that they think that speaking and selling are two separate things, which is what I talked about before. And when you understand that speaking is selling, your whole presentation must be built around the offer. It was actually the video testimonial that I got back from Amy Porterfield. If you ever get a chance to watch it, she literally says something along the lines of, and when I made my offer, people said to me, it just made sense. It was just the next step, and they were wanting me to share with them the next steps. And so that's how it should feel. It should feel good. It should feel like if this content resonated, then this is the logical next step for you if you want to go to the next level. Now, how you do that is you actually start with the offer. And so you have to be thinking about your offer as the presentation. So in other words, you're delivering your presentation leading to the offer. Now, this is the big mistake that a lot of people make, is that they think that there's no value in doing a presentation. There's just a sales presentation and leads to an offer. But I beg to differ, because the reason why your audience hasn't got results in the area is not because they don't know how to do it. Because this is the thing, is they can probably get a lot more information than they've got already on YouTube, on some sort of internet thing that they can search and find, than they have right now. They can get a lot of the how. The reason why they haven't got a result is because they haven't made a congruent decision. And so the main purpose of your presentation when you first meet someone is to help them to make a congruent decision. And you provide some really helpful principles throughout. So it's like you need to pepper I call it infusion selling, where you're basically infusing selling through all of your principles and your ideas. So they're valuable, helping them make a decision, and it leads directly to an offer.
One of the things you talked about live stages, you talked about webinars, you talked about basically what amounts to a video series. I know your product launches, at least the most recent launch was through a video series. There's a lot of people in the audience that are thinking about going that route when it comes to like how I want to launch, what feels good to me. If you're good on video, if you like story, if you're good at creating connection, like a video series makes sense. Walk us through kind of how you thought about the video series. I think one of the things you said early on that we kind of glanced over was the importance of early on, that very first video, is to get them to agree that this vehicle is something that they want. And the way that you sequence that video series is really important. So just at a high level, can you walk us through the components of, let's call it a 3-part or however many parts you think is accurate, video series in terms of what it's supposed to do in video 1 and then video 2. And I want people to really understand and visualize how that launch works and the sequencing of things in your perspective that makes it click.
Yeah. So sequencing is really important because it could be 3-part, it could be 7-part, it could be 8-part, it doesn't matter. The sequencing is actually really important. So for me, the first part is about getting that congruent understanding that the vehicle that you're offering, that you're talking about, is going to get someone the results that they want if they learn how to use it properly. And so if that's Facebook groups, then you have to show them the opportunity that's available for them in Facebook groups, or in, for me, selling on a stage, whatever stage that is. And so you have to show them the relevance, the importance, the excitement of that opportunity, and share with them how that can look for them. The second piece is you actually teach them content that's really valuable and relevant for them. Maybe give them a few, like maybe one little small action to take so that they can get some momentum with it. But in those concepts that you're teaching, you're also addressing the resistance points and the desire points for the vehicle or the offer that you're going to share at the end. So that's kind of the second main part, usually the second part of the series. And then the third part of the series is really showing them the big framework or the big process that you take people through. So maybe you've got a 5-step framework or a 3-step framework, and you go deep into that, and then you address all the resistance points as well. And then for me, what I like to do is make the offer and then take the offer back. And so what I mean by that, it's like the offer and pull the offer. So you go, hey, if you've really resonated with the content and you would love to go forward with this to the next level, we're going to be giving you an opportunity in the next couple of days to join blah-de-blah, whatever your program's name is. Yeah. And for now, I want you to just join the VIP waitlist to just show your interest. You're also going to get all these special bonuses if you join the VIP waitlist. And so we're opening up in the next couple of days. So put your name down there. We'll send you the information when it comes out. And so I love that idea. And it's a bit more sophisticated than that, but you're basically building to that point. And you go, hey, I've got this amazing program. These are the results that we're getting. These are the students that have seen these results. And then it's like, but it's not open yet. All we're doing is just gathering interest. And people are like, give me this program. Like, they should be, by the second video, by the way, you pretty much should be having people go, okay, what am I ready to buy from you for? I know for me, when we just ran the video series, the feedback that I got in the survey was like, I was ready to buy after the first video. And so that should be the result, because they understood the vehicle, the power of the vehicle. And so they should be ready to buy from video one. And I will say this, a 3-part video series is one of the most, I think it's the most sophisticated launch you can do. And so personally, if you haven't ever done a launch, I would recommend doing a webinar. But if you want to give a video series a go, my first video series that I did, I had 600 people go through it and I had one purchase. So this was about 6 or 7 years ago. I ran my first video series. I had one purchase. Why? The offer wasn't irresistible. And the way that I sequenced the content, the messaging wasn't right. But this last sequence, we had a ton of people buy, and the conversion rates were insane.
What's the reason for that? It's kind of a new thing where you, like what you said about putting the offer out and then pulling it back. I saw Stu McLaren did it. James Wedmore did it. I'm sure other people are doing it. When did that become a thing? Because one of the things I love about being in digital marketing and being in our space is that everyone's figuring it out. Everybody's testing and doing things. And as soon as someone has a massive launch, doing it this way, everybody wants to rip it, try it. What's the psychology? Like, what's the reason of making the offer and then, like, is it just to create scarcity or urgency, or is it just the whole, you want what you can't have the most?
It's a bit of that. So when you think about it logically, especially if you're doing a 3-part video series, it makes total sense to do it. The reason why is because, especially with Facebook and how Facebook's working at the moment, is that first video, you're probably going to get, let's say your launch list is 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. At most, you're probably going to get about 60 to 100 people watching live on that last video. Okay, about 6 to 10% on a live video. On a webinar, you should be getting about 30% show up rate. That's like good benchmark. But on a live series, you're getting about 6 to 10%. So what that means is like 94% of the people haven't actually watched the training. And if you go ahead and make the offer and they haven't watched the training, they're not prepped for it. And so the reason why it works so well is, if you look at the structure of a 3-part video series, is that you do the last video on the Thursday, and then you give them Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to watch the whole series and finish the series before you actually make the offer.
Are you running, just getting in the weeds for a minute, are you running retargeting ads to the people that started, that opted into the video series that through analytics have not watched it? Are you trying to tell them like, hey, like, are you pushing them through watching the training, knowing that the offer's coming on Monday? And how do you,
100%.
do that?
100%. So as soon as you finish the first video, you running that as an ad, second video, running that as an ad, third video, running that as an ad. And this is the thing, I mean, you don't really know who's watched the actual series until you start running it as an ad, because it won't register in the ads piece. So it's more just pushing it to your launch list, and you're going to have video 1, video 2, video 3, and just letting that run.
That makes total sense. So you're basically doing that strategy to let people who aren't following you in real time catch up.
Correct.
And the people that have followed you in real time that already want it are going to buy no matter what anyway. And you're just fielding emails and questions like, when can I buy this thing? And I've seen people say, for those people, that 5, 6, 7%, hey, jump on a call with one of my people, and then they'll sell it to you before the card opens in like kind of like stealth mode. It's like, this is getting into the launch weeds, but I love this stuff, and
it's cool, eh?
You're really good at it.
Thank you.
So my question for you is, what do you think, if you were to pinpoint one thing or a couple of things that have been key to your success over these last couple of years? You went from 600 people in a video series and one purchase not that long ago, although in internet years, it's like a century, to today in your most recent series and what you're doing. What do you think, if you were to just net it out, the most valuable thing or the most critical piece to your success has been?
I mean, one of them is, and it kind of comes back to who you're being, is deciding that you want to be a leader. We're talking about parentpreneurs, and, you probably got kids and a family and so forth like that. And, if you're a parent, you kind of have to lead in your family. Like, you have to be a leader, you have to show up. And if you're in the marketplace, you have to make that decision like big time if you want to actually get known. And so for me, it was probably about 2 years ago that I really decided, like, I want to be the number one person in the world. And I actually wrote down, I want to lead market leaders in how to speak and sell on stage. And at the time when I wrote that down, I didn't have any of these amazing people that I'd coached in that space. I'd coached a lot of people in the executive market, but not like in this marketing space, in the expert industry. And so I think, first of all, it's just that decision is like, is that what you want? And if you want to be a leader, the metaphor I like to use is you have to pull out of the peloton. Now, what I mean by that is, if bike riding, being in a peloton like Tour de France, everyone in the peloton's running at a certain pace. But at some point, if you want to be a leader, you have to pull out of the peloton, and you ride up the side and you pull out the front, and you take the resistance. You take the intensity of what that momentum is. And market leaders pull out of the peloton and they take the resistance. And so, I don't know, you can hear my kids screaming in the background. It's a real parentpreneur. You have to pull out of the peloton and take that resistance. And for me, I made that decision on just another level, because I feel like we make it at different levels as we go through. And you just decide to show up. And that's probably one of the biggest things. I can go into all the other things like refining your offer and, staying in it for the long term and making great relationships and masterminds and everything. But really for me, it's that decision of like, I love this question that Brené Brown asked the other night. We saw her speak in LA just recently. And she asked this one question that honestly changed my life. She said, how are you engineering your life small to avoid uncertainty, vulnerability, and emotional exposure? And I was like, wow. I was like, that is just such a profound question, that we engineer our life small. In other words, we don't go live on Facebook. We don't apply. So I know for me, I spoke the Influence Conference, which National Speakers Association run, the biggest conference in America. When I went there for the first time last year, and when I went there, I was like, I don't want to go. I want to speak there. And it felt so emotionally vulnerable, so exposing, so unfamiliar. But I was like, I just want to put, and if they say no, they say no. I ended up speaking there. I ended up getting a slot and speaking at the conference for the first time. But I was like, I don't want to engineer my life small so that I just be an attendee of my life. I want to pull out of my peloton and just feel that intensity at the front, because that's where leaders sit. And that's the decision that I made, and that's the decision I want to encourage all of your listeners to make.
And every single person that we're going to talk to, yourself included, that's achieved at a high level has made a decision and fought their inner demons and dealt with resistance and stayed committed and dealt with the doubts, all the things, right? And they come up. So I love that you said that. And I think your kids screamed on cue there, because I wanted to ask you, you're living this life along with the rest of us as a parentpreneur. You've doubled down, you've gone all in, you've really taken that challenge that you put on yourself to rise and not be an attendee in your life. What is the biggest challenge you've seen as a parentpreneur taking your business to this next level over the last couple of years?
I think because I'm naturally and becoming more and more as an entrepreneur, like goal orientated, right? And so probably a lot of the people listening are driven people. Like if you're an entrepreneur, you've got some drive in you. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is because as an entrepreneur, you don't just go to work and leave work and stop thinking about work. Like I'm thinking about offers and thinking about how I can help. I'm coming up with ideas for people, my clients, all the time. I'll be voxering them at 11 p.m. at night going, hey, I just thought about this for your offer. You should do this. And so for me, it's one of the revelations that I had recently was realizing that my relationship with my kids and my relationship with my wife really should be a goal, because you can become so obsessed with your business that I was finding that I was viewing my kids as almost like a deterrent to reaching the goals that I wanted to reach in my business, the revenue marks, whatever it is, significance in my business. And I realized that I was totally missing the point. And so recently I realized that, I'm going to finish work straight after our call. I have to make that a goal to connect with them. And, that is just as important as hitting a certain revenue goal. And so that's been my biggest challenge that I'm continuing to work on, and but starting to find some clarity in that space as well. So
before I let you go, what's your number one parting piece of advice for parentpreneurs who want to get better at connecting with and growing an audience and selling from stage?
The biggest thing is to show up. What I mean by showing up is your audience is showing up to the degree that you are showing up. And I was having a conversation with a friend just recently, and he said to me, he was really like struggling with something. And I said to him, so you're sending emails to your audience every week, right? You're showing up on Facebook every single week, talking about your content. You're, sharing relevant content in Facebook groups or whatever it is. Like you're applying to speaking. And he's like, no, I haven't been doing any of that. And I'm like, well, no wonder your business isn't growing, because you're not showing up. And so if you're wondering why your audience hasn't showed up for you, it's because you haven't showed up for your audience. And I say that with love. And the reason why is because you pretty much have to show up 10 times the degree to which you want your audience to show up. And so I know for me, whenever I speak, I'm the bigger version of myself on stage. I'm not a small version. I'm a big version of myself. When I run a webinar, when we do a video series, like I've got AC/DC cranking up here. I'm getting pumped up. I'm ready to show up. Like it's on, people. And so for me, my piece of advice to you is that if your audience isn't showing up, is because there's more growth for you to show up for your audience. And when you show up, your audience will respond to you. And there is a bit of lag time, so give it some grace, but keep showing up. You watch everyone at the top of their game. They're consistent. They show up consistently. They don't miss a podcast. They don't miss an Instagram post. They don't miss a Facebook post. They don't miss a newsletter. They're on. And the reason why they build $1 million businesses is because they're consistent, they show up, and that connects with people. It resonates with them, and it shows that they're credible, they can be trusted.
Freaking brilliant, Colin Boyd. So I mean, this has been an exceptional conversation. For the audience out there who would want to follow you, and I can't imagine anyone out there doesn't at this point in the conversation, where's the best place to go do that online, learn more about your work?
I love the Instagrams. So if you want to connect with me on Instagram, and it's Colin Boyd, ColinBoyd. So it's just one L, Colin Boyd. Or on Facebook, we've got a group called The Expert Edge. And I share a bit of content and stuff like that in there around building an expert business. So they're probably the two main areas.
Great stuff, man. Incredible tips. And just, from somebody who's met you in person a handful of times and follows your work and is also a student of yours, you practice what you preach. You do show the hell up every single day for your audience. And it's no wonder you've been so successful and you continue to be successful. So thank you for taking time out of the day.
Wait. Before you go, did you know that the most successful online businesses are built working in 90-day blocks, prioritizing only the big projects that truly drive revenue and fuel growth? If you want to make next quarter your best one yet, head over to nickmurphy.io/guide to grab your free copy of the 90-day Parentpreneur Planner. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here on the next episode of the Parentpreneur Podcast.